Good morning, everyone. I pray everyone is well, and it's good to be with you. And I'll get right into my message. What in the world is the world? Or I could have called this, what on earth is the earth? Or even, what in the cosmos is the cosmos? Dan Haley, number 2 and number 3, have been preaching and doing Bible studies lately, where the meaning of the word world had been discussed and interpreted. Dan number 3 just did a study last Wednesday, so this may be a little bit redundant, but I want to study it more fully and in a structured manner so you can understand the nuances of the King James Version and why it has to be more fully explained in order to sort it all out. The problem with the King James Version in this particular case is that it translates 4 completely different New Testament Greek words into the same English word world. As an aside, and I am not going to get into the Old Testament, but the King James also takes 4 or 5 different Hebrew words and also translates them, all of them, with the same English word world as well. But getting back to the New Testament, let me start with an overview of these words. The single English word world is a translation of these Greek words. I've got a chart here. Okay, the first column there is the Greek word with using English characters to spell it out. The second column is Strong's pronunciation. And the third column is what I've come up with as a very simple interpretation of what the word means, and of course allowing from some overlap. So the first word is GE, which is pronounced gay, and basically it is world as physical land. The second word is AION, but actually according to Strong's it should be pronounced HEON, and it is world as a period of time. The third word is cosmos, which we would also pronounce, it looks like cosmos, and it is world as a cultural society. And the fourth word is that one, which is pronounced oikumene, and it is, I think, world as a political identity. I think that best sums it up. Let me say that it is not exactly incorrect to understand all of them by the word world, but it blurs the meaning of each. It is only correct if you understand them with their different shades of meaning. Sometimes one might be able to tell its meaning from the context, but many times one cannot be sure. The point is, the original authors used 4 different Greek words to convey 4 different meanings. So why should our English Bibles confuse these differences by only using one generic word, which leads to confusion? Yeah. All right, the first word, let's start with the Greek word gay first. This is the easiest to deal with because although this word is used 252 times in the Greek New Testament, it is only translated world 1 time in the King James. It is Strong's number, well, let me see here. Yeah, all right. It is Strong's number 1093, gay. Now, Strong's definition is this: contracted from the primary word soil. By extension, then, it can mean a region or the solid part of the whole of the terrain, or that is like terrestrial globe, and including the occupants in each application. The King James translates it as either country, earth, earthly, ground, land, or world. Strong's is telling us that the Greek word's primary meaning has to do with the soil. It is something solid, like the earth, the globe, the land, a region, a country, and the world in that sense. It says it can also include the inhabitants of a region, but its primary sense has more to do with the land than the inhabitants that live on it, or the inhabitants themselves. Now, this is strange. As I said, gay is found 252 times in the Greek New Testament, but only one single time does the King James translate it world. Gay is used 82 times in the book of Revelation. 81 times the King James translates it earth. But for some strange reason, one single time they translate it world. Why on earth would they do that? Or should I say, why in the world would they do that? I don't know. But to be honest, it doesn't really matter. I'm not sure there is any important point of confusion in the use or translation of this particular word. The word gay generally refers to the physical earth, meaning the soil, the ground, or certain areas of ground, such as a region, country. But all words have some flexibility. Now, next one. Let's look at the very first use of this word, Matthew 2:6. And thou, Bethlehem, in the land, gay, of Judah, art not the least among the princes of Judah, for out of thee shall come a governor that shall rule my people Israel. Now, this is perfect. We can see that Bethlehem is a town in a certain physical geographical region where the tribe of Judah lived. This is where the Judahites, or Jews, lived, but primarily the word is referring to geographic region and not the people. Let's look at the next few chapters of Matthew to see how it's used. Matthew 2:20 and 21 is almost exactly the same. Saying, arise and take the young child and his mother and go into the land of Israel, for they are dead which sought the young child's life. And of course, that word land is a translation of gay. Matthew 4:15, the land gay of Zebulun and the land gay of Nephthalim, by the way of the sea, beyond the Jordan, Galilee of the Gentiles. The people which sat in darkness saw great light, and to them which sat in the region and shadow of death, light is sprung up. Note that the people being referred to are in a certain region of land. Matthew 5:5. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Gay. Matthew 5:13. You are the salt of the earth. Gay. These are pretty straightforward. We can now see how they conform to the idea of the physical earth, soil, or a geographic region, even if the borders of that land or earth are defined by people. But now the next one is not so obvious. One might jump to an unnecessary conclusion. Matthew 5:18. For verily I say unto you, till heaven and earth, gay, pass, one jot or one tittle shall in no wise pass from the law till all be fulfilled. I don't know about you, but for me, this sentence is a little convoluted. And at first reading, I'm not sure exactly what all of it means or how to put it together. Does this mean heaven and earth will pass away if the law passes away? Or heaven and earth will pass away when the law passes away? Or heaven and earth will pass away when the law is fulfilled? And what does the earth pass away mean? Does it mean changing governments or the melting of its very rocks and elements. I think some people think that it says heaven and earth will pass away when the law passes away and all is fulfilled. Or when the law is fulfilled, then the law will pass away, and so will heaven and earth. And when they say the earth will pass away, they mean the very elements of the earth will be consumed in fire, and God will have to make a brand new planet. But others think these words are symbolic, and the earth is not going to melt away as if in an iron melting furnace. It just means the governments and societies of the world as we know them are going to come to an end. I am open to suggestions, but as I study this word gay, I find that it means the physical earth, not governments. Also, I ask, how can the physical earth symbolically pass away? To me, that's contradictory. So I look at this verse again, and it seems to me that we might be reading too much into what it says. I think this verse is simpler than what I first thought. On reflection, looking at it again, I think we need to reflect on this verse, and I think it says the entire law, next verse. I think it says this verse is saying only one of two things can happen. The entire law is going to stay in effect until either one, the physical earth passes away, or two, the law is fulfilled. And if that is correct, I conclude this. Because the sacrifice of Jesus did fulfill the ritualistic shadow of the law, the rituals have now passed. So we need not worry about the physical earth passing away. In fact, the physical earth was never in danger because God was never going to let the rituals of the law pass until Jesus fulfilled those rituals. But after Jesus did, then there was no need for a physical temple, and it could finally be destroyed in AD 70. You may have to think about that a little bit, but it makes sense to me. The next one is not difficult to understand, but we do have to be more comprehensive in our understanding of the earth. Matthew 6:10, thy kingdom come, thy will be done in earth, gay, as it is in heaven. Here, God's will is not going to literally be done in the soil of the earth. So I think gay, here translated earth, is better understood as a very large region. Perhaps the whole globe or planet is included. I pray that it is. The gay, in this sense, is still something physical, but it is meant to convey that God's will be done all around the whole earth. There are 226 verses with the word gay in them, and I have only looked at a few, but I trust this gets the general picture across. If you know of a verse that contradicts me, please let me know. I'll look into it. Now, let's look at another word translated world that means something completely different. Number 2 word, AION, that is translated world. It is Strong's number G165. AION, pronounced either Aeon or Heon. It's used 128 times. Strong's definition is this: from the same as G104, properly an age, by extension, so they say, perpetuity, also past, by implication, the world, specifically the Jewish or world, or a messianic period, present or future. The King James translates it, this one word, these many different ways. It translates it age, course, eternal, forever, ever, evermore, never, ever, beginning of the world, or while the world, or world began, or world without end. So they like to have fun with that word. The noun form is found 128 times in the King James. It translates it world about 40 times, and some form of forever about 60 times. Among some other miscellaneous interpretation, it also actually does more properly translates it age, but only twice out of 128 times. Most of us in this group are quite familiar with what a poor and inconsistent job the King James does in translating this Greek word, and how much more accurate and consistent the concordant version does, or other versions as well. Essentially, this word always has a temporal as opposed to a spatial meaning. It should always be translated AION or Aeonian instead of world, or age lasting, if you prefer those translations. But it is interesting that on further study, we find that the King James authors were not as wrong as we might think. The King James was first published in 1611, and 400 years ago, many words had somewhat different meanings. I believe that it was common for them to understand world as a period of time instead of a place. Heritage Dictionary says that world derives from an Old and Middle English word, weorwold. It then references the Germanic word vir, which is akin to the Latin vir, which means man, and to the Germanic alt, which is a life or an age, and from which we get our word old. So you put those together and you get vir alt, a man life, or a man age, or an age of man. So from ancient times, the origins of our word world was always temporal and not spatial. The King James translators may have always meant it to imply a time period, and it may be that our modern understanding of them is incorrect because the meanings of words change over time. A while back, while I was slow at making the correct change at McDonald's, the cashier said, "Don't worry, I have all the time in the world." It is a common enough saying, but where did it come from? Well, now we know. The phrase does not mean the planet has a lot of time. No, the planet has a lot of space. But the phrase makes sense because when we say world, we now understand that viralt originally meant a whole lifetime. The cashier was actually saying that she had her whole life to wait. I don't know about her boss. So, why is this important to Bible study? It makes all the difference in the world. Let's look at 3 verses in Matthew. Matthew 13:39. The enemy that sowed them is the devil. The harvest is the end of the world, AION, and the reapers are the angels. Matthew 13:49. So shall it be at the end of the world, or AION. The angel shall come forth and sever the wicked from among the just. And Matthew 24:3. And as he sat upon the Mount of Olives, the disciples came unto him privately, saying, Tell us, when shall these things be? And what shall be the sign of thy coming at the end of the world, or AION. What Jesus was telling the apostles was concerning the end of a certain AION or eon or period of time, and not the end of the planet. Now, that may not be much of a revelation to you, but to many people, they think the elements of the earth are going to melt down and God is going to make a completely new planet out of new materials. But these verses are simply not saying that. Matthew 12:30. And whosoever speaks a word against the Son of Man, it shall be forgiven him. But whosoever speaks against the Holy Ghost, it shall not be forgiven him, neither in this world, neither in the world to come. This is a serious offense, but it should be rendered neither in this eon or aeon, nor in that which is impending. You might not think that this helps the sinner very much, but it makes a huge difference. Planets may not often come and go, but eons or ages come and go all the time, literally. If there is just one more eon that follows the current eon, the sinner has hope. Or at least if there's just two more eons, I guess I should have said, that follow the current eon and the next one, the sinner has hope. Small corrections can be improved and make better sense of a verse. For instance, this verse, Luke 1:70. As he spoke by the mouth of his holy prophets, which have been since the world, AION, began. By better, I mean this. The prophets being spoken of were not speaking at the beginning of the planet, but at the, or even, back at the time of Adam and Eve, but at the beginning of the age of Israel, a certain age, and I take it that age was the age of Israel because that's who the prophet spoke to. It is very important to know which time period is being referred to. Otherwise, prophecies can be misapplied to the wrong time and or to the wrong people. Slide next. Luke 16:8. The children of this world, AION, are in their generation wiser than the children of light. 2 Corinthians 4:4. In whom the God of this world, AION, hath blinded the minds of them which believe not. Romans 12:2. And be not conformed to this world, AION. This planet may not be perfect, but it is not evil. It is our current age that is evil. This word too may not have been too hard for us to cope with, but the next two get more complicated, and I think even the concordant version could do a much better job. So the next word is KOSMOS. It is Strong's G2889, pronounced cosmos. It's used 187 times, and in the verb form, it is used 10 times. Strong's definition says this, probably from the base of 2865. Orderly arrangement, that is decoration. Now, by somehow, they get by implication the world in a wide or narrow sense, including its inhabitants, literally or figuratively and morally. That gives them a lot of leeway. The King James Version translates it as adorning and world. The verb form is translated by the Concordant Version as decorate and adorn, and the King James as garnished, trimmed, and adorn. Strong says by implication, the word means world, How so? How is it that the world is arranged orderly? It is true that our universe is ordered, but so is a woman's necklace. They are both types of cosmos, but should the same word be applied to both? This is why it is hard to pigeonhole this word. I think most of us raised in the space age and during Carl Sagan's popular TV program of the same name automatically associate it, cosmos, with the vast universe and everything in it. But that is completely wrong. Remember, this Greek word originated 2,000 or 3,000 years ago. Now, that is not to say the Greeks were ignorant about the stars and planets, but neither does it mean they applied it to the stars. They were more concerned about everyday life on Earth rather than what was happening in outer space. If the main definition and sense of this word is orderly arrangement and or decoration, how is it that the word is translated as world by both the King James and Concordant? How is the planet an orderly arrangement or decorated, trimmed, and adorned? Once again, it is how one understands the context or idiom of the word. The Greek word cosmos might be translated world, but it must be understood, as I've said, as an orderly, arranged, or decorated, so to speak, world. So, what is most important is to understand this. It is not the planet that the Greeks were referring to as organized, but the people on the planet. They were talking about how the people were governed or ordered in the sense of a society, especially an advanced, civilized society within a certain culture. Unfortunately, this is far from what we normally think when we hear the word cosmos. Today, the cosmos is almost everything except the Earth. Further confirmation of this definition of the Greek cosmos is found in ancient Greek dictionaries. Lexicographers Liddell and Scott is one of the most comprehensive ancient Greek dictionaries. They state that it means one, order, good behavior, decency, the form, fashion of a thing, of states, order, government. Or two, it can be an ornament, a decoration, embellishment, dress. Three, it can be a regulator. And finally, four, it can mean the world or universe from its perfect order. Mankind, as we use world in the New Testament. And that's where they're getting that meaning from, is because they think it is properly used that way in the New Testament. So while Liddell and Scott acknowledge that cosmos can mean the physical world as used in the New Testament, their primary definition is that of good order, good behavior, decency, government, in other words, a society. In the May-June 2004 issue of Archaeology Odyssey, an article explains that to the Spartans, the cosmos was the sum total of their government and their social order. In other words, their society. And even though the conversion translates cosmos as world, they know this is misleading. In 1938, they wrote that it means system or order is the underlying thought in the word cosmos, which is usually rendered world in English. We seriously considered dropping the word world at one time, as it is more or less encrusted with misleading theological ideas. but there does not seem to be a very good substitute. We might have tried system, or even just left the word as cosmos, using the Greek word, as we did with AION, but they didn't. If one looks up world in the concordance at the back of their New Testament translation, you will find that they say this, cosmos, and then it has system as its standard meaning. It immediately notes that it is also translated adornment of women in 1 Peter 3:3, and it defines cosmos by saying, especially the constitution of a human society in a given period of time called an eon. So what I am saying is nothing new. Everyone in higher linguistic learning knows this, but it is not commonly known by your average Bible student. The cosmos is not the universe, the solar system, or the planet Earth. Despite the many Bible translations to the contrary, it should not be translated world, because that is utterly confusing. And all these translations know it. But I do have 3 oddball New Testament versions out of 25 that I looked at that dared to not translate cosmos as world. 2 of them leave the word untranslated as cosmos, and the other uses the word society. One of those translations is the David Hart translation, recommended to me by Dan Haley III. And as an aside, this version also translates Christ as anointed, which I also think is much more helpful in understanding its meaning. Because if Christ is always referring to the person of Jesus, sometimes the context just does not make sense. But that is off my main point. Returning now to cosmos, the trouble with leaving it untranslated as cosmos is that most readers will still automatically and wrongly associate the word with the whole world or planet instead of a particular ordered system of human society. Okay, so who cares? Does this make a difference in anything important? It sure does. Consider this verse. Matthew 24:14. And this gospel of the kingdom shall be preached in all the world for a witness unto all nations, and then shall come to an end. Then the end. When ye therefore shall see the abomination of desolation spoken of by Daniel the prophet stand in the holy place, whoso reads, let him understand. Then let him which be in Judea flee into the mountains. Let him which is on the housetop not come down to take anything out of his house. Dan Numbers 2 and 3 have recently been teaching that the end of the world came in AD 70. Previously, we might have thought they were crazy, but if the end of the world really meant the end of a particular ordered system of human society, then they are not crazy at all. In fact, it is a historical fact accepted by everyone that the Roman armies marched into Judah and encamped around Jerusalem in AD 70, preparing for a long time to attack. And previous, during, and after this, hundreds of thousands of Jews died, either through starvation, disease, exposure, infighting among themselves, suicide, or finally at the sword of the Romans. The remainder who survived were forced into slavery, with very few managing to escape. After that, the Romans completely and utterly destroyed the whole city, just as Jesus prophesied, not leaving one stone upon another. And this is what Matthew 24 is talking about. When you see the city surrounded, get out of town. The Romans did not destroy the whole world, but they did destroy the world of the Jews. Their cosmos was their particular ordered system of human society. The kingdom of Judah, along with its temple, kings, priests, Sanhedrin, laws, capital city, nation, and people, was forever destroyed as a functioning kingdom. So I repeat, we should only understand this word, as the end of the Jewish cosmos. Because of time, I will end my explanation of cosmos at this point. But to be honest, this explanation brings up a lot more questions. For instance, the Gospels say Jesus came to take the sins of the cosmos away, not the world, and to save. And we're all familiar with John 3:16. For God so loved the world that he came to save the world. He didn't come, it doesn't say he came to save the world. It says he came to save the cosmos. But if cosmos does not mean all people on the whole planet, well then, we have some explaining to do. And I'm not denying our universalist position, but it is going to take a lot more explaining, Lucy. But I have to move on to the fourth and final word translated world in the King James. Number 4, oikumene, Strong's number G3625. It is only used 15 times. Strong's definition says, where am I at? Feminine participle, present passive of G3611. Okay. As noun, excuse me here a second. Okay. Oikumene. Feminine present, participle present passive, blah, blah, blah. As noun, by implication, land. That is the terrestrial part of the globe, specifically the Roman Empire. And the King James translates it either using the word earth or world. So we see here that although this word is also translated world, the more narrow focus of its meaning has to do with the physical land, and yet at the same time, Strong says it specifically has to do with the Roman Empire. Let me say that that may be too narrow a definition, but I agree with the general principle that it has to do with geography and politics. The concordant keyword concordance lists this word under and translates oikumene as inhabited earth at all 15 places it appears. It defines it as the crust of earth, which is inhabited. Then it says we suggest habitants. As much as I admire the concordant version, once again, I believe its use of inhabited earth is much too broad and hence will lead to more confusion. A casual reader will read all the inhabited earth and will understandably think that it means everywhere on the whole planet where any people are living. So that includes North and South America and Australia, for instance. But if we read the context, we will find that this is utterly impossible. Liddell and Scott define oikumene as the inhabited world, a term used to designate the Greek world as opposed to barbarian lands. So in Roman times, it would be the Roman world. So we see that Liddell and Scott define it more narrowly along the lines of Strong. It is a geographical area, but it is limited to the civilized Greek and Roman lands and not to the barbarian lands of the Germans. Strabo was a great geographer. who died in about 25 AD, and therefore had written not long before Paul. He described the oikumene in his 17-volume book simply titled Geography. It included practically all the lands inhabited by the Romans, Parthians, Scythians, and others of Asia, and all of North Africa, but not the rest of the world. Diodorus Siculus was a great historian who was writing in about 40 BC. In his famous book titled Library of History, he referred to the lands about India as the limits of the inhabited oikumene. This was the limits of their political and cultural world, in spite of the fact that Strabo, Diodorus, and others knew very well of lands inhabited by alien tribes, both in Africa to the south and to the east in India, but which were not considered a part of the oikumene, nor could they be included in their cosmos. Let's consider Luke 2:1. Luke 2:1, King James. And it came to pass in those days that there went out a decree from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. The concordant version reads, now it occurred in those days that a decree came out from Caesar Augustus that the entire inhabited earth register. This is one of the most telling verses on this subject in the New Testament. The Roman Empire was vast, but it was limited to all the lands surrounding the Mediterranean Sea, and to the north only so far as Scotland and Germany, and to the south it only included a small portion of northern Africa. So how can we possibly translate this verse as the entire inhabited earth when we know better? There's no way that Caesar was trying to tax North and South America or elsewhere outside the Roman Empire. And finally, Caesar Augustus never tried to tax or register India, China, Russia, the Americas, or Australia. His world was only that which he controlled. He controlled many different types of physical land, any valleys to mountain ranges. He controlled that age, or AION, which was the Roman age. He controlled many different cultural societies, including the Egyptians, Hebrews, Greeks, Franks, English, and others, all of which made up his worldly political empire, which was his oikumene. I pray that was interesting, scripturally enlightening, and leads to further discussion on how, when, and where God is currently operating in this world. Thank you, and amen.